webinar, What to Expect When You Are Outsourcing the Management of Your SAP Applications. My name is Robert Melconian, and I am the SAP Practice Director at YASH Technologies. I've been in the SAP space for about 20 years now, initially as a FICO consultant at SAP America, and then subsequently as a project and program manager. Also worked at Siemens Information Services and CSC, and I've been with YASH for about 3 years now. So just to level set a little bit, if everyone doesn't know about YASH, so YASH is about 3,500 global employees. Our core area of ERP, our only focus ERP package that we focus on is SAP. We primarily, a lot of our employees are on SAP. We do have some non-SAP practices as well, but for the focus of this presentation today, it'll be on SAP and specifically Applications Management Services, or AMS in SAP, which is a core area of ours, and we support both U.S.-based and global-based clients in the AMS space. As far as the agenda for today, we'll look at some of the AMS challenges, review and discuss the engagement models within AMS, and then the core area of the presentation about what to expect. Focus area will be on transitioning and knowledge transfer, change management, governance, and additional topics. That being said, every engagement is a little bit different. There's key things to understand about AMS and know what you're expecting from your partners. So I will be talking about the different models, and towards the end, we'll have a QA portion at the end of the webinar. Joining us will be Suj Fatak from YASH, who has helped many of our clients successfully transition to AMS responsibilities over to YASH. And again, we will have a Q&A portion at the end. So just, please type any questions you may have in the questions box on your side panel. Thank you. So AMS challenges, what is AMS about? Why do you need AMS? What's the current landscape? So on average, a lot of enterprises spend a whopping 73% of their IT budget on application maintenance. Additionally, recently there was a study or an article I read from ASUG that said 3/4 of large SAP companies are planning on outsourcing their IT. So clearly it's an area that's grown over my career with SAP, and it's an area that is, I think, more and more clients, as their SAP landscape matures, are investigating if they're not using it, and if they're using it, looking at different models and how to support and maximize their SAP implementation and landscape. As far as what should the solutions focus on in the AMS is business value, what are your returns, what are your ROI, and also the results. So it's a large opportunity, and as far as the clients who are already on it or those who are thinking about it, to realize cost savings out of your SAP implementation. Challenges in application management and AMS, classic challenges, and those of you who have AMS or have support outsourcing, you probably face some of these. So, these numbers were from Gartner, but what are some of the classic ones? Poor visibility. I've had clients and prospects, we don't have transparency. We open up tickets, we're not sure where they are, right? So that's an example. Poor end user experience, many ping-ponging or getting bounced around. Complexity of your SAP landscape. And then, of course, the reliability. I open up a ticket, I expect a response in X amount of time, and a resolution with a certain amount of time. So those are otherwise known as SLAs, or service, service levels. And so we will be discussing that as well. And just to think about it, if you categorize your application or management services or AMS concerns, there's three key areas. People, which is always a situation, whether it's in a project implementation or transition or the AMS itself. So from a people standpoint, and we'll talk about this more in model, what's the blend I should have of people? What should be client? What should be vendor? What are the different models? And we'll talk about the fractional resources. I may not need consultants, full-time consultants, but I need some support in certain areas. Processes, governance, the SLAs that I referred to, the supports. This is a key element of, especially as clients roll out to multi-site or global model of support, you need to have processing in place to have control mechanisms and transparencies, and make sure your client is not frustrated because the processes are undefined. And finally, tools. What are the tools that I would use to keep track of SLAs? How do I measure? Even basic things such as help desk tickets. This would be a good time to have a little poll and get a feeling of where people have had some challenges, those of you who are AMS or have considered it. So this would be a good time to do a poll, and we've picked 4 questions, and there's an other category. So can everybody, Adam, can everybody see the poll?
Yes, we have launched a poll, Bob.
You have? Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's give people a little time to respond.
Bob, we have closed the poll. If you can see the results.
Nope, can't see the results at this point.
Okay. I'll read them off to you. About 43% did respond with not enough resources or time for after standard hours coverage. It looks like in second were the poor service to end users due to limited staff. Then we had a bit of a tie with the first and third, difficulty of keeping up with ticket volume and cost of maintaining the application landscape. So those were the results, but it looks like a majority did respond with not enough resources or time for after standard coverage.
Okay, I'm glad, because we do have a slide here. I'm not glad that people don't have enough standard hours. I'm glad that that's a pressing point, as we have a slide that discusses about what your model should be for global support. So thank you. Okay, that was interesting. So here at this point, I want to talk about the different models and the discussion about the pros and cons of the different AMS models. So let's talk about the dedicated support service initially. So this is, the classical model of you're the client, there's an SAP help desk in between, and then the vendor will do functional support, technical support, and basis support. Implied in here also is, if you've got a different types of objects, whether you have BI, that can also be in here. If you have SRM portal, so this means those areas could be construed under here as well for those of you who might not neatly fall into one of these boxes. And if I go way back in when I early started in my SAP career, a lot of the support services in this dedicated model came typically often from the project team. And then clients would build a COE or Center of Excellence, and they would support it in-house. And, this takes that model, but now instead there's a third-party vendor like YASH doing a lot of the functional technical support. Some of the benefits of this model would be increased, end user satisfaction. There's always somebody there. The consultants are dedicated, and the consultants also learn your processes because this is a dedicated model. You control the resources in this model, and a lot of clients are comfortable with this model for themselves, especially early on as they go live and they need extra support in their SAP landscape. The other model that I've seen more and more of our prospects and clients use in conjunction, and sometimes, they'll use the shared services model with a dedicated, some sort of hybrid, but this is a shared services model where, once again, you'll go through the same SAP help desk, but the resource, the consultant who's supporting you may be supporting someone else. And quite often this is a case where, and I'll use my background in FICO as an example, you don't have a big FICO platform, you don't have a lot of financials, but you need somebody less than full-time, but maybe it's a bucket of hours, maybe it's a half-time role. And then YASH would have that person supporting you, but they may be supporting another client who's in the shared services model. Advantage of this is it reduces your cost because you don't have a dedicated team. It's kind of a nice bucket of hours. You will control the hours, and then as I said, I've seen a lot of our clients that do a hybrid where for key areas. So I've got a client who's got a large HCM platform. Well, they want a full-time HCM person, and so they'll be in a dedicated HCM person, a dedicated basis, and other. But then on the other components that aren't as critical, SD, sales and distribution, or finance, they would then just have a shared services model. What I want to also talk about is the offshore engagement models, the classic offshore engagement models. The first one is ODC, or Offshore Delivery Center. This is the case where, as people are doing application maintenance support offshore, the vendor owns the resources. The vendor has a dedicated facility for the client. So ODC, or Offshore Delivery Center, very common. YASH does it. I'm sure some of our competitors do it as well. Has the dedicated client center in the facility. The BOT is build, operate, transfer. This is kind of YASH or another client or situation where they would build it out for you. They would operate for a period of time, and they would transfer it. Joint venture is another flavor of that, and I did have a prospect who wanted to build a PMO team offshore. So we did engage in some conversations with them for a BOT that may transfer to a joint venture because, we had the facilities there and they didn't want to ramp up offshore facility right from scratch. So, that would allow you to have a jump start going to the BOT or sometimes the joint venture model as well. Finally, the captive model is the client sets up their own offshore presence, and a lot of times the evolution may go from the BOT to a joint venture to a captive over a period of time. So these are all different flavors of an offshore engagement model that I've seen and that YASH or any other vendor may be able to provide you. This is an important point. The onshore-offshore work model. There's no one-size-fits-all, everybody. It depends on the comfort level. It depends on your organizational culture. You should really focus on, what is the case, what you think will work in your specific organization. What I've seen often is at least some, even with clients who say, I want to move my AMS offshore, it makes sense to have some onshore representation, especially initially. So I would say this is a key slide, this is a key component, and this will also drive the pricing point of the vendor as well, too, from an overall package. So you want to think of, there's multiple factors that I've mentioned. What's your corporate culture? Where in your SAP lifetime are you? And what is your budget and price point? But I would say, some sort of blend. You may want to think of what's a good ratio. Is it 50-50 to start? Is it 25-75 onshore, offshore to start? And it also tends to be evolutionary. One of our future slides, when we focus on transition, I'll be talking about, how a blended approach may work best for you in this situation. This also talks about the customer steering committee, what's the structure, with the analyst and the project manager. And so this falls on the governance as well, and processes that I've mentioned. In the bottom, in the middle there, about minor enhancements and mini projects, this is where you want to think about with your partner is what defines or constitutes a project, because often clients will say, hey, I've hired XYZ or YASH, and it's typically, let's say, break fix or what we call sustain activity. But also there's mini projects in there. I want to do a user exit. I want to have some sort of custom report. There's a benchmark. Often it'll be 40 hours or 80 hours of work would constitute a project, and that may fall outside the classic AMS support team. So pay close attention to that metric as well. So now to focus on, expectations and critical lessons around knowledge transfer and transition, organizational change management for AMS, and governance. So a transition is and having been involved in several of these while at YASH, is a key element on how you're going to succeed and what sort of start and what sort of, like any project, you want to get it off to a good start. You want to make sure things are identified. We're going to go through it on the next slide. But, there's focus. As you're transitioning, like any transition, any change, it can be disruptive. So the planning around that and having a phased approach, and really, quite frankly, having been a PM before, I would say manage it, make sure you manage it as a project. Make sure you've got a project plan with work steps, just like any other project. It's not going to happen magically, And so, as I said, there's a transition of employees, of work, establishing the governance, and then achieving what you're trying to do. And throughout it, there's the transition and the KT phase, and we'll look at it at the next slide, too, as well. So this is an example of one. Once again, it can vary, but I think this is for, let's say a $1 billion company. This would be a good representation of a transition. And this transition could be from a go-live aspect, or it could be, I've seen models where a prospect comes to us and says, hey, I want to give my SAP support to a third party. So, they'll put it out to bid, and we'll be one of the parties bidding on it. Or this could also be from vendor to vendor. So think of it, depending on either one of those situations or any situation with the transition, there's the handover operations. And in a couple of slides, we'll be looking at some of the critical milestones around this handover or the transition. And as I said, it depends on the size of the organization. There isn't a one-size-that-fits-all, but I think this is a good model to look at during, whether it's the handover, the focus, the streamline, or the improvement. So during the handover, this is a case where, where, as I mentioned, you want to have a project team in place. You want to have a good project plan. You want to manage it just as a project. You want to understand what's your role as the customer versus the vendors in this. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to go bullet by bullet. But it's good general information. Is what are the initial SLAs? Because those will change over a period of time. What I think is one of the key elements is the knowledge transfer piece. So if you've established and you've been live on SAP for 3 or 4 years, how are you going to execute that knowledge transfer to the third party that comes in? Have you documented your processes that you can share with someone? Have you documented your IMG? do you have a list of your transports? Do you have training? What impacts are there going to be with a lot of these? There's going to be some uncertainty, just like any transition. So the more you can be organized about it, the more you execute it as any other project, the cleaner it will go. So that's where I would focus on the handover. Not only is just knowledge transfer one way, but knowledge transfer is both ways. So what we typically do is, if the KT or the knowledge transfer is coming from the client, we will have our consultants that it comes to, and then we will do reverse knowledge transfer workshops as well to make sure that we're ready to run. Also, there's a situation where initial tickets may be, your team may be supporting them for the first 2 weeks, and then there's a transition to the third party over a period of time. And as you can see on the bottom of this, it talks about the full-time equivalent model of the FTE and then the hybrid. So the other expectation up front here, and what I've seen happen, is if you're going with a heavy offshore model, then often the consultants will come onshore initially for that knowledge transfer to happen. Could be a 4 to 6 week period where they'll be on site as you're doing the knowledge transfer to them. So I can't overstate the importance of getting this done and having the handoff, and especially if it's a new relationship with the vendor, you want to get off to a good start. Okay. Focused operations. This is the next phase where, okay, we're starting to walk. I mean, we crawled, now we're starting to walk, and you're capturing new metrics, you're doing the execution, but it's still almost a warranty type period after a go live, right? You're still stabilizing. The streamline operations, as it speaks, is okay. Now we've got things humming along, things are going well, and then finally, once I've stabilized and things are going well, I'm looking at improving my operations at that point, because the tickets are getting done, things are working well, so I can also think about how do I improve my processes at that point. As I note, this is a sample transition plan for first year. So typically, I've seen a lot of the AMS contracts that vendors, if you provide to a vendor, typically no less than 2 years has been my experience, but some will go up to 5 years. And sometimes also from a pricing standpoint, your first year will be your highest cost just because of the investment you're making initially to get the ball rolling. Critical aspects of transition. What's the duration of the knowledge transfer? I know I've beaten that horse dead, but it's a key aspect. What's the duration of stabilization? It's not a one-size-fits-all. The previous slide just is, guideline. Depends. If I'm a $10 billion global company and I want to roll out, I'm going to support globally, is different than a, excuse me, $500 million company that's US-based. What also, what is my help desk associated cost? Governance around emergency tickets. Not to underplay that, because unfortunately, as you're transitioning, you still have a business to run, right? So how am I going to handle that? And we'll be talking about off-hour support in a while. And then finally, working with third parties. A lot of times in in 2014 in the SAP world, you could have one vendor who had done the implementation, another vendor who's doing the hosting, another vendor who's doing the hardware, and another vendor who's doing your functional support. So these are all critical aspects to think about. This slide, it talks about, in summary, the expectations after an AMS transition. Before the transition, what it's trying to indicate is, your fixed budget is greater because you're investing in it. After the transition, hopefully your fixed budget is a little lower because you've stabilized. That's when you should be recovering some of your ROI, and you're still you should be able to engage in the same things as before: your enhancements, your maintenance support, and your strategic priorities. Knowledge transfer milestones. I know it's a lot of detail here. I'm not going to go in excruciating detail on each and every one. It's probably after lunch for a lot of people. I don't want everybody just dozing off here, but I think this is a good reference or a checklist. Some of the things are patently obvious, like an SOW sign, but the knowledge acquisition, right? The transition and training plans, as I mentioned, the interviews with processes, just basic things. Can the vendor sign on to my system? Does the vendor have access? Do we have VPN set up? Just like any other project, all these things have to be thought about and accounted for. What I had talked about here before is the shadow support versus reverse shadow support. When I used to talk to my clients when I was implementing, to a certain extent it's a relay race, right? And there's a handoff. So this is talking about how that handoff would happen. Is the shadow support, is the vendor teams working with your subject matter experts, tracking it, make sure they understand it, and eventually they start taking over. Okay, so that's the intent of this of the KT transfer milestones. Let's talk a little bit about change management and SLAs here. So everybody thinks of the classic change management, when I'm implementing. We've all gone through these projects. If we have, there's the OCM, or the change management, which really a lot of times focuses on training and communications and the critical element of success on a lot of these projects. Well, vendor will, AMS change management is a little different because the assumption is you've already gone live and taken care of that, but it's still necessary. People, there's going to be change impact if you think about it. If you go through it, there's going to be change impact to people's roles and responsibilities and jobs, and change from a hardware, software, and the people and the process standpoint too. So those things have to be accounted for as well. If you're going to an outsourcing model and you have an existing team of employees who are supporting it, then their roles could potentially change, and you have to deal with that change. Just a hardware change could be some change management associated with it. Ultimately, just like any change, ultimately it's the adoption by your users and your clients and your customers, which is the ultimate goal, and minimizing the disruption to that adoption through having a defined OCM, or change management process. Excuse me. This slide depicts, and it's a pretty good slide, that depicts of what's the evolution of this change management. Typically you want to make sure your vendor has tools and templates and experience in having gone through this change. And although it's a technical component, as we know, this involves people and humans and change and emotion. So you have to be able to deal with this aspect of change. So the first step would be the readiness assessment, just to gauge where you are organizationally. Second is to make sure the leadership and the executives are aligned to the change. And then after that, it's about the execution, the analysis, making sure the business is ready, and then the communications around it. Similar to a certain extent to your initial go live, but a little different because you've probably been live in SAP for a while, and there's different aspects you have to think about when you're going through this type of change. SLAs, I want to talk about service levels and management. So there's different types of SLAs, and this is really typically negotiated. And this talks about the process on them, right? Is you're gathering them, what's critical. I mean, the key ones that I've seen, and it's really, they can negotiate and how you measure your business. But, the basic ones are always around response time and resolution time. No matter what, you need to have at least some SLAs around response and resolution time. Depending on the size of your organization, if you're multinational, if you're multi-global, multi-site, then you could have others. But at minimum, you want to have response and resolution SLAs around this. And then it's talking about, and the other thing is these evolve too. What you may have thought was important, and that's what's being depicted on the bottom, what you may have thought was an important SLA initially may not be as important once you're 6 months into the project or the program, and vice versa. So this just depicts it, as I said, R&R, or as we say in Boston, R&R, is what you want to at least have a bare minimum of. Okay. Next is governance. And this is, we have referred to it about the processes. So this will depict the governance and different levels. Okay, I'll say not all my clients have a steering committee that's set up for governance related to AMS and outsourcing, but at minimum, you should have the bottom of the project management, especially with the risk, the schedule, and just good, solid project management around the, especially as I mentioned, the transition, but the whole outsourcing model. And a lot of clients will have the program, and as I said, steering will be, I think, a function of the size and breadth of your organization, what you're offshoring or outsourcing, I should say. And there's clients that may just need some break fix, a bucket of hours, so you may not even have any of this. So I think this is case by case, but it's a good reference. And as I said, the governance monitors the program, the processes, and really sets a direction and makes sure you're getting that transparency and quality that you desire. So this was, I'm glad it was 43% about the coverage model. So that's why I had included this ticket. The people's AMS concerned 43% were about coverage after. So this is an area you want to be very clear about when you work with your vendor. Here's 3 components. There's more, but there's 3. One of the first things you want to think about is the 24/7 coverage for critical SEV1 or production down. It's not likely, and this is the discussion you need to have with the vendor, that there'll be, you're not going to have a FICO consultant or an SD guy or SD consultant there 24 hours a day. But what you want to make sure is when you have someone there who can respond to you in a timely fashion with 24 hours a day. So a lot of times that's a discussion you want to have. So what's the coverage model? What's common is, it may be 8 to 12 hours that overlaps with your work day. However, this becomes a critical of importance. Is we had a prospect that had sites in Europe and the U.S. So when we were discussing the proposal with them, we had to address how do you cover the U.S. and Europe. It's not unusual for clients to have U.S., Europe, and Asia Pac also. So this is a key element, is what's your coverage model, okay? Now the 24/5 is Monday through Friday for high, medium, and low. This is more common, the understanding which hours are going to be covered, what happens with holidays. And that transitions to the next bucket. Support coverage, holiday, and blackout days, okay? And this is just talking about how the team would follow the U.S. holiday calendar. Now, I think about, as I've done more and more of these AMS activities, is having visibility and make sure, especially a lot of the support, if the support's offshore, whether it's in India or Philippines, having clear communication of, okay, what are the holidays in India or the Philippines, and what's the coverage model? So I would say, just be ahead of the curve on this. Make sure it's clearly communicated and understand what you're getting when you engage with a partner on a coverage model, and what level of support for which level. I think the expectation is, as I said, the severity 1 or the P0s, you want a faster response than, a level 2 or level 3 ticket item. Okay, that covers the core on those. The next 4 or 5 slides discuss additional topics related to AMS. So the COE I mentioned, but the Center of Excellence framework. What's a framework? I mean, everybody's going to customize it, but it's good to start with something. This is what I've seen is with the program management office up top, process owners, OCM supporting it, and then the process drivers with the help desk. and then the support below it, and the custom applications and the integration management and the IT support. So this is a COE framework. Everyone can start with something like this and customize it for themselves. Okay, these are pricing models that we've typically run across: fixed bid, time and materials, capacity-based pricing, and ticket-based pricing. You know, I still, at least my personal experience, the most common are fixed bid and time and materials. But I see some clients who, you know, we've discussed ticket-based pricing or capacity-based. More ticket-based pricing has been my experience. But fixed bid, you know, is understandable to a certain extent. I've seen clients, generally mid-sized, that say we want X amount of hours or X amount of resources, and then, you know, it's a predictable. They know what the price is up front, and you know, it's easy from a budgeting. Time and material, it's just priced on usage. You know, it provides more flexibility. It can go up and down, and you know, it's a classical T&M model. And then there's ticket-based pricing. Now, the challenge on ticket-based pricing sometimes is if it's a net new implementation that then gets outsourced, well, we don't have capacity on tickets, so you may want to, you know, you may want to go from a time and materials to ticket-based pricing in that case, because you just don't have those metrics for 3 months or 6 months. And typically, what I've also seen is, you know, there's a review point, you know, a good faith review point that, okay, we're not sure what your tickets are going to be, Mr. Client. Let's put in a clause in the statement of work that at 6 months we'll go back and revisit it, and we could do repricing either way. Standard AMS support levels. For those of you who are have worked with a lot of AMS, this is probably fairly common, but this is one of a good glossary of them. So level 1, help desk support. Your help desk starts, you know, common issues, data errors, I can't sign in, different items, I'm getting an error message. Then level 2 is operational support. Level 3 is minor improvements and maintenance support. And then level 4, as I mentioned, here they're using 80 hours as what designates a project. I've seen 40 used or 80 used. And what I've also seen is the common model, and you want to think about this, a lot of times that level 1 support can be YASH or the third party, or it can be your employees. So a lot of times there's a blend between this level 1 and level 2 where, you know, you're doing level 1 support and then you use the vendor as an overflow or for things you can't focus, or, you know, you want your employees to be working on projects in different higher activities, so break-fix activity gets outsourced to a vendor. Run SAP Methodology. This SAP, for those of you who've been in the SAP world as long as I have, you know about ASAP Methodology at this point. But then SAP also has the Run SAP Methodology for new AMS support. YASH's processes and methodologies are based on this, and no matter who you speak with, whichever partner, you should get an identification, or you should identify what type of methodology and is based on this platform, or that it's a phased approach with these types of activities phase by phase. Finally, this is an interesting item. So we've had clients who've asked for flexible staffing model. So, you know, in this case, what this slide tries to depict is how do we do a flexible, especially if you're a seasonal business, or, you know, you want to say, I want to be able to flex up and flex down for projects, you know. That I've seen that actually more than a seasonal business now that I think about it is, okay, you know, we're going along sustaining, but I want to flex up because I'm doing a new rollout to Europe, and then I want to be able to flex down. So this is a depiction of a ramp up, ramp down option. And what I've seen us do is we've got a flex team or an overage team where sometimes we'll have maybe 10% staff that's flex with the core team. So you have a core outsourcing team that supports you, but then there's this hidden capacity of, let's say, 10%, in the flex team will augment it. And so it gives you some elasticity, and it allows you to do it at a more cost-effective standpoint.